Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to share how to set up SSH with Kali Linux and Windows 10. So this will work for any Linux distribution. However, in this video I am using Kali Linux, so I might make a separate video for Ubuntu if there's any slight little differences, but you can follow this video if you're using Ubuntu or, for example, Mint. So what is SSH? Well, SSH is a shell. It allows people to connect to servers or local accounts that are basically they don't have direct access to. So for example, if this was like a server and it had certain web files on it that needed editing, an employee can go home on his laptop, use SSH to basically SSH into the server and then make changes at home. So he could work from home, for example. In this case, I'm going to be using Kali Linux as a virtual machine. My Windows 10 machine is going to SSH into this Kali machine, so I can control my Kali machine and make changes to certain files through Windows 10. Now, this could be a separate laptop, and you don't have to be next to it. You can be anywhere in the world, but for this video, it's just going to be local. So I've basically drawn a diagram to help you understand what's going to happen. So imagine there's someone called Ryan and John. John at home has a desktop PC and Ryan at home has a laptop. This is the Linux system here. So imagine they're web developers, and on the Linux system there is web files that need editing. Ryan's laptop will generate a key pair. This key pair is what the key authentication uses. So Ryan's laptop will have on it a stored private key, because when you generate a key pair, it generates a public and private key. The private key must be kept private by that person, so that needs to be secure and not seen by anyone else. So that will be stored somewhere secretly on his laptop at home. His public key will be copied and pasted into a file on his local account, so his local directory, which no one else has access to. His local account will have a file on it called authorized keys. He will paste his public key inside of that. Then when he tries to connect through SSH to the system, it will match his private key from his desktop, so he'll locate his private key, and that will try and compare to the public key stored on his local account. If they match, which when they generated, they will have like a unique algorithm that will match them up. If they match up, then it will gain access, therefore he can make changes to the file wherever he is in the world. The same thing with John. John at home on his desktop PC will generate a private key. On his local account on the system, he will have an authorized keys file. Inside of that will be his public key. But let's say John's a rogue employee and he tries to log into Ryan's account to destroy his work, for example, or delete his work. John tries to use SSH into Ryan's account. So when you SSH, it will allow you to enter a username to log in as. So say he types Ryan's local account's username instead of his own, it will try and log him in as Ryan. But because his private key doesn't match Ryan's public key, it will refuse access. John will need Ryan's private key, and why it's so secure is because the private key is stored on Ryan's laptop. Therefore, John would have to go and steal Ryan's laptop. And even if it is stolen, on the Linux system, Ryan can remove that public key from his local authorized keys file. And once that public key is removed, that private key becomes basically redundant. It becomes useless. So hopefully that does make sense, but it'll make more sense throughout the video. So let's just minimize that now. The first thing you need to do is head over to this link in the description. It's for PuTTY, and PuTTY is basically what we're going to use to actually connect via SSH. So this is the application here, and all you need to do is type the IP address of the server or system, and you can use SSH and open. So you need this application to be able to do this. There are different ones that you can use, free ones for SSH, but I prefer PuTTY because it gives you a key generator as well. So all you need to do is click on either this one or this one, go through the installation, and then you should have two applications installed. It's PuTTY Gen. So if you search PuTTY, as you can see here, there's the PuTTY generator and also the PuTTY desktop app. So you need both. Now what we can do here is, once the application's open, we can generate a private and public key. So all you need to do is open the generator, go to generate, and then all you need to do is move the mouse on this like blank space here. It will generate a random key. So as you can see here, this is the public key. So this right here, all you need to do is copy it, and this is the public key. So we need to paste this inside the authorized keys file on this local account here. Now for Kali Linux, the local account is called root. So we're going to be SSH into root, which is like, for example, on this diagram, this could be Ryan's account. So if we go to the Linux system now, in fact, we'll generate the private key. So all you need to do for that is go down here and click Save Private Key. It says, are you sure I want to save this key without a passphrase? So you can even add a passphrase to the private key for extra security, but we don't want to do that, so it's fine because we can just keep the key secure itself. You could just call this key. You could call it whatever you like. So this is the key. You probably wouldn't call it key, but you get the idea. On the desktop, so we'll save the private key now. So the private key is on the local computer, for example, at home. In this case, if we look at the diagram, so the private key is now stored on the desktop here. And now what we need to do is upload the public key to the Linux system. But first, we need to install OpenSSH on the Linux system. So open your terminal. Now, if you're new to this channel and video, the reason my terminal looks different is because I'm using an app called Terminator. It works exactly the same as the terminal. So just open your terminal and it will work exactly the same. So all we need to do now is actually install OpenSSH. So what you need to do is type apt-get install OpenSSH. Just zoom in so you can see it a little bit better. -server. Click enter. Press Y and click enter. That will install OpenSSH. Just give it a second. It shouldn't take too long. While that's doing that, what I'll do is I'll create a second account. Oh no, never mind, it's finished. So there we go. So we've installed OpenSSH. So we need to make a few changes to the config file. So I'm going to type clear to remove all of that, and then go to the directory to make changes to the config file. So all you need to do is type cd /etc/ /SSH. There we go. So if you type ls, we're inside the directory, and as you can see here, there's two config files. Make sure you edit this one. So you type leafpad. You can use nano or vim, but I prefer leafpad. It's just easier, more convenient. So leafpad, and then all you need to do is type the name of it. So sshd_config, click enter, and there we go. So this is the config file for the SSH server. The first thing you want to change is the port. Now, when you make changes to this, make sure you remove the # or the hashtag. Now, I do apologize about the text. The text might be a little bit small to see, but you'll see port here, and all you want to do is remove the # or the hashtag at the start of it. I'll call it a #, and then change this port number. So port by default is on 22. However, you can use any other port number. I'm going to use 1986. Just remember that port number. If you scroll down a little bit, if you go to permit root login. Now, for me, because it's Kali Linux, and Kali Linux is like a pen testing tool for ethical hacking and pen testing, it allows root access, or it's designed to have root access. Because if I go up here really quickly, it's important to understand this. If I go to account settings, as you can see, there's no users because Kali Linux is specifically designed just to log in as root. But on Ubuntu, for example, you will have an administrator account. So you don't have to do this part for like Ubuntu, but I'd do it anyway. So permit root login, prohibit password, you want to change that to yes. So I actually, in fact, don't do this if you're on Ubuntu. If you're on Kali Linux, just carry on doing this. I will make a separate video for Ubuntu, so this will be for Kali Linux specifically. So permit root login, yes. And then down here, because we want to use authorized keys file only, we want to uncomment this, and uncomment means basically just remove the hashtag or #. So remove that, press Ctrl S to save it. Now there's one more change we need to make. If we scroll down here, now I believe that, in fact, I think that'll do. I'm just making sure I've got the configuration right. So the only ones you need to change is the port, the authorized keys file, and the permit root login. So that should be enough for this. So that's great. So just press Ctrl S, make sure you save it. We can close out of that now. So that's the configuration done. Now let's create, I'm going to split this horizontally to get a new terminal window open. I'm going to go back to the root directory. And at the root directory, so you can open a new terminal window, I'm going to create the local space for where to store the authorized keys file. So this is where the authorized keys file will go. And if you remember, inside the authorized keys file is the public key. The public key we copied from the key generator. So to create this directory, all we need to do is type mkdir for make directory, then the squiggly line, I forgot what that's called, so it's just like a squiggly line. That's what I'm going to call it, /.ssh. So we'll make the directory SSH in the root directory. Then we need to set certain permissions to it, so cmod 700, and then the same again, so the squiggly line /.ssh. The cmod 700 gives it the correct permissions for SSH. Then we need to create a file for authorized keys. So the way to do it really quickly is by touch. The command touch in Kali Linux or Linux systems will create a file. Then all you need to do is copy the same directory again, but then / and call it authorized keys. So this will create a file called authorized keys. Make sure, even if you're English like me, make sure you spell it the American way. And then _keys. And then click enter, so that creates the authorized keys file. Then we need to set the right permissions for the authorized keys, so I'm just going to press the up arrow, change this to 600, and then direct it to the authorized keys file. Click enter, and there we go. So we've changed it to the permissions are right for the SSH folder and the authorized keys file. Now we need to basically start the SSH server. So service. So if you type service SSH start, click enter, that will start the SSH server on the system. So I'm just going to close out of this now, just minimize it for now, and go back to this diagram. So what we've done now is we've created, let's imagine this is Ryan's account. So we've created a space for him to store the public key, which was the authorized keys file. And remember, that's different for every account on the system. Since there's only one account up to now, I will create a separate one just to show you. We've got the space now to store the public key. We've generated the private key and called it key and stored it on my Windows 10 machine. Now we're going to use SSH to go into this system. But first, we need to actually add the public key inside the authorized keys file. So I'm going to copy it again from the key generator. So make sure you copy the whole thing. Then I'm going to go back to the Linux system here, and what we can do directly from here is we can go into, in fact, what you can type is you can type leafpad, and then that directory where we created the file. So make sure it's authorized _keys. Be a good idea if I could spell leafpad. So leafpad, there we go. So this is the authorized keys file where all the public keys will go. Now, since we only have one public key, we'll paste it inside of here, save it, close out of that, and there we go. So the SSH is set up now. You should be able to connect through SSH. And I'm just going to explain SSH a little bit more. So we've just copied the public key into the authorized keys file. Now, Ryan can have many different laptops, and every single device that he has will have a different public and private key. So don't think you can copy and paste the private key that we've just generated onto another computer. If you've got another computer, or in this case Ryan might have a desktop, then he will generate a public and private key for that. Then he will get that public key that matches the second private key and paste it inside the authorized keys file as well. So there'll be two public keys inside the authorized keys file, one for one device, another for a different device, and then he will have his private keys on the correct devices, if that makes sense. So the same thing with John. If John had a different computer, he would generate a separate public and private key. So let's see if this SSH actually works. So we've got our key generator, that's fine, you can leave that up. What we need to do now is actually connect via SSH. Now this is where you will need, if you're using Kali Linux as a virtual machine, you will need a USB wireless adapter to connect to your router. The reason for that is because VMware uses a bridged virtual connection. If it says wired, then you will not have an internal IP address. You just need to use a USB wireless adapter. So I recommend going to get one. If you don't have one, you can create another virtual machine with Windows 10 on it and install PuTTY on that. As you can see here, I've got a Windows 10 virtual machine. You could install one of them, run the virtual machine on Windows 10, use SSH through that, because basically virtual machines create like a little mini network of virtual machines. You've got your LAN network, which is your home router, for example, with all your family's devices connected to it. But then when you create virtual machines, it creates like a little mini network of virtual machines. Now the way to like sort of break that little network of virtual machines, because each virtual machine in that mini network cannot communicate to other devices on the LAN network. And the way to break that out is by getting a USB wireless adapter and connecting it directly through the virtual machine, as you can see here. So once you've done that, you can type ifconfig, and if you're using a a wireless USB adapter, you can use WLAN 0, and it might be WLAN 1 for you. If you've got an iNet address for it, that's what you need, so you can copy and paste that, so you can just copy it. Now if you're using two virtual machines, like I said before with Windows 10, then you would use the ETH0 iNet address. Well, in my case, because I'm using a USB wireless adapter, I will use that one. Okay, didn't copy, but you just type it in here, 192.168. This will be different for you, obviously. And then the port, if you've got to remember the port that you put inside the configuration file, which is 1986 for me. And then because we're using key authentication only, we need to go down to SSH. Now I apologize about the screen being really tiny here, but if under connection tab there's SSH, then expand it and go to authentication. It's just called auth. This is where we can add the private key. So we click browse and we just browse to the private key that we generated. As you can see, it's here. We click open, and then now we can click open again and use SSH to connect to the Kali machine. So if I click open, now ignore this message and you probably won't get it. It's just because I've already done this before. It's using the cached key, and cached just basically means in memory it just fetches something that's already been used before to speed up the process, but because it's completely new, then it's just saying a potential security breach. Ignore this message, it's still working, you probably won't get it, so it's fine. So I'm just going to click yes, and as you can see here it says login as. So this is where the different accounts come into it. So imagine this is a workplace server again with the web development thing on it. This is a web server. If John tries to log in as Ryan's account, he can't, because John only has his own private key on his computer, which only matches his public key, because Ryan's public key does not match John's private key. But in this case, because we've only got one account on this Kali Linux machine called root, we'll just type root. So what you do here is you would type the account name. So in my case it's called root. For you it would probably just be your name. As you can see, it's here. So root. Authenticating, I don't need my password because it's using the key authentication. Authenticating with public key, and as you can see it's worked. So I'll just quickly close this out, and if I open PuTTY again, I'll type the IP address and show you what happens when you don't add the private key. So this time we're not adding the private key, and we're just going to try and connect directly. So it says login as, we'll just type root, click enter, root's password, we'll click enter, and access denied. Now it shouldn't ask for a password, but let's just see. If I type the password, as you can see here, it's logged in without the key. So the way to get around that, if it does happen, we need to go back to the configuration file. Just open the configuration file here. Let's find where it says passwords. So let's scroll down. Password authentication. So you want to uncomment that and change that to no. So this will be key only now. And permit empty passwords, no. So make sure you uncomment these two. in the configuration file, close that out, restart the server. So you type service SSH restart, click enter, that will restart it. So if I open PuTTY again and type 192.168, now this is key authentication only, because you can log in SSH without a key, like I've just done with the username and password of the account only. But I prefer to use key authentication because of the private and public keys are so secure. So 192.168.0.13 for the IP address, that will be different for you, and the port. Make sure you get the port right, which was in the configuration file. So now I'm going to try and connect without the private key again, and let's see if it lets me log in. So I'll type root, and there we go. So disconnected, no supported authentication methods available. So as you can see, I'm trying to log in as root. I don't have root's private key. So you could be a different employee trying to log in as root. You don't have this account's private key, so you can't log in through SSH. So this key, that private key that I have, is extremely important. This key right here. We could create a different account for John and store a private key on the desktop as well. That will be John's private key, and then try and connect to Ryan's computer. So let's just quickly have a look. The video is basically ended here. That is how to set up key authentication with SSH only. However, I'm just going to show you really quickly a different account with a different private key and public key. So I'll just close out of that now. And what I'll do is I'll make a user. So user add, this will add a different user and we'll call it John. User. The home directory already exists. Ignore that message because I've already created a user called John before, so the home directory already exists. So that's fine. The user John has been created, because now if we go up here, go to account settings, as you can see, the user John has been created. So we need to set John a password, so sudo password for John. You can ignore this bit because I'm just creating a user account. So there we go. We've got a user account now. What we can do is we can switch user to John. Now we've switched user, we're logged in as John now. We can create him a local directory to store his private and public key. So it's the same again, mkdir. We'll create SSH again. In fact, it already exists. I've completely forgot about that because I've already done it before. So that's quite useful, so it just speeds it up. So what we can do is we can go inside of this directory. If I type ls, it's already got an authorized keys file, so that's brilliant. So as you can see, we've basically done exactly the same as we did before with the mkdir. It's already been created though, so that we've even got an authorized keys file. So what I can do here is I can use I use Nano to edit this. So authorized keys. Nano's a different text editor, so Nano authorized keys. There's already a key inside of here, and that is from a previous attempt. So what I can do is I can just remove all of this. Let's just remove this, so we can use, there we go. So that's that, ignore that key then. So now what we need to do is we need to generate John a private and public key. So we go back to the PuTTY key generator. We'll generate a new public key and private key, so I'll just move them out over here, and this is now John's. So we save this private key and we'll call this John. You can call it John or whatever, call it another key, it doesn't really matter. We need this public key, so we copy that and put it inside John's local authorized keys file. Let's see if that copied correctly. Just make sure that that's copied. Yeah, there we go. So we can press Ctrl X to save it, press Y and click enter. So there we go. So that saved it in the authorized keys file. So now John can actually use SSH to his own account. So hopefully this bit will make sense. So I'm going to open PuTTY now and try and connect as John. So let's imagine we're John now on his laptop at home. So he tries to connect through SSH. He goes to SSH here, use the authentication, adds his own key, because his key matches his public key inside his local authorized keys file. Both accounts, or any account on this system, will have its own authorized keys file. And then click open. We'll log in as John, and there we go. So it logs in directly. But now I'll close it and do it one more time. If we open it again, and type the IP address. There we go. And what I'll do is I'll try and log in as root. So let's, like I said before, imagine John. We're a rogue employee now. So John is, and he's trying to connect to the root account to basically delete all the system files. What he'll try and do is, if he tries to connect using his key, because in this case he wouldn't have access to this key, only his own on his laptop, so he'd use his own key, and then he'd log into the system. So let's just make sure everything's correct. He'd open it, and he'd try and log in as root, and as you can see, server refused our key. So only he can log in to his own account, and the same way with root. Root cannot log into John's account or whoever owns root. So that's why it's so secure, because the private key is safe on your own device. The public key can be seen by anyone, and it's stored on your local account on the system, in a local directory. So if I switch user again back to root, if I type ls, as you can see, we're inside John's directory here. So he's got his own authorized keys file, and so have we. So if I press cd, I'll clear this one last time. If I type cd, and we'll go inside of this directory that we created at the start, ls, and there we go. So root has its own authorized keys file, and so does John. So that's how to set up key authorization with SSH for a Linux system only. So no password and username, it's key only. Once you have access, so I'll just show you what it looks like when you have access before I end the video. Can't even type today. I'll connect as root, so I'll use the root, the first private key that we generated. So this key is for the root account. I'll click open. I'll log in as root. There we go. So as you can see, it says root at Kali, so it looks exactly like this, and we've got access to the terminal, so we can make changes. You can log in as multiple users. So this could be John's account. So if I close that, open putty, you can have multiple users working on the same thing. So if I use SSH to connect as John, so I use John's key. No idea where I said John, just random. 192.168 again. That's 0.13.86. If I click open and log in as John, there we go. The key is authenticated because he used the correct private key to match his public key that's stored in his local account in the authorized keys file. And there we go. So we're on John's account now. As you can see, we're in the home directory for John. We can create directories, we can edit files, and I'm also logged in as root. So technically you could have multiple users. You can type who am I in this, so you can see who you're currently logged in as, John. So this could be a server with multiple different workers, employees, etc. And they would only be allowed to connect to their own account, because that's how the private keys work. If you have multiple different devices, like I said before, remember to generate a public and private key for each device. So if root account had a different laptop, I'd download putty, generate a new private and public key. Once I got the public key, paste it inside the authorized keys file after the original authorized key. So there's already one public key in there, so just click enter, make a new line, and paste the new public key. That way you'll have two public keys in the authorized keys file, which means you'll have two devices. The two devices will have separate private keys, and if, for example, your laptop got stolen, you would know to remove the matching public key with the private key, the one that's been stolen, the laptop with it on. Remove that public key from the authorized keys file, and then they won't be able to SSH into your account, even though they've got your private key, because your authorized keys file does not contain the matching public key. So I think that's enough for one video. Hopefully it did make sense. If you're still confused, please leave a comment. It will help as much as possible with this, but SSH is extremely useful. I recommend going to learn a little bit about it, maybe on the computer science side of things. But I'll leave the video there, so if it did help, please leave a like, comment if you're stuck with anything, I'll be happy to help, subscribe for future content, and I will see you all in the next video.